So welcome back, chapter 4. And this is where Sid breaks down project types that she's been engaged in, or are typically the ones that you'll come across in government when talking about civic technology. And so she breaks it down into service delivery projects, infrastructure and data projects, specialized tools for digital government, then this notion of swooping in for a rescue, and finally, the biggest bang for the least tech. All right, let's start off with service delivery projects. These are your large-scale projects that may, for example, require the government to gather information on taxation, on eligibility for rebates in childcare or single parenting, or any other context that someone might find themselves in, for example, disability pension, longer term. And this is usually where civil society, citizens have to go onto a portal. They have to engage on a weekly or bi-monthly process of declaring their movements, their pay, their casual work, their current status. And to expect vulnerable populations to do this is quite complicated sometimes, given the level of challenges that individuals are living with. Importantly here is that large-scale projects, and usually in the US, they are state-based, if not county-based. But let's stay with state-based, whether it's tax or anything else of that nature. There are all of these different rules that companies need to abide by, and also citizens need to understand. It is not a simple process to tell somebody to go to the web to use a particular service. So the work of a public interest technologist to some degree is to simplify the process of engagement between government to consumer or government to citizen flows of transactions, because that's what's occurring. Even if there's no money that's being passed between the two entities, what we have is information flows and access to information, which will empower people. And this usually happens through service delivery projects. Infrastructure and data projects, we've seen a huge change in the way that governments actually deal with infrastructure. There used to be capital costs, now ongoingly they're heralded as operational expenditures. You have infrastructure that is based on legacy systems, even in the 70s, that needs to be upgraded. And some of the challenges that we are well aware of is the scant nature of people being currently available to consult on something that occurred 20, 30 years ago, that was built so long ago. There are no notes, there are no competencies in that field of programming. For example, let's talk about COBOL, for instance. You'd think it would have been eradicated, but that's not the case. And so infrastructure remains a huge thing, and infrastructure as a service, increasingly with cloud provisioning. And also a movement of different types of stakeholders coming onto the cloud, the public cloud or the cloud that's owned by the government, to facilitate different kinds of processes. Data projects, the same thing. How do we source data, up-to-date data? How might we reuse through open data initiatives, data that's been generated by taxpayers back into innovation or mobile innovation in a particular context, so that businesses can harness the power of taxpayer-funded data generation, whatever that might be. It might be to do with a local council that is looking at access to public roads, or the number of trees on sidewalks, or the number of people required to change light bulbs, whether light bulbs should be on during the night when there is no one around, or they invest in motion detection, a whole bunch of things that in the past we haven't discussed. And Sid tells a story in her Sacramento TEDx talk of when her daughter noted there were sprinklers going when the day was already misty and raining and cold, and that it was such a waste. And Sid contacted the local government area. The council got back to her with an auto text message, and actually something was done about closing off those sprinklers. So you can already see a child's sentiment of these sprinklers should not be going on, and Sid's action as an adult to basically say, you know, are we sure we want to be having sprinklers on? Isn't this a waste of water? Actually created a reaction in an action. And so the local council said, yep, we'll look into this. Yep, they fixed it. And so there you see an obvious feedback loop. It's wonderful that this is continuously occurring, and more of this feedback would be great. If some of this was automated into the future, it would also be wonderful. As I mentioned, motion detection systems and motion inserts in light bulbs on street lampposts. Specialized tools for digital government is also important. How do they harness the variety of tools required, and also request specialized tools to help them do their work better? Digital governments are those that use the digital platform for communications, but also for analysis. For instance, there may be data collection occurring for taxation that uses data matching programs to see whether someone is actually telling the truth or not, or whether there are anomalies or exceptions. Now, some of these tools have gone too far and identified people who should not have been identified as perhaps defrauding the system, and others are still required that can do this capability. Swooping in for a rescue is when really a new technology does need to be instituted to save a project. On the rare occasions, this may be an upgrade, this may be some way to plug a gaping hole, or this may well be an upgrade of some sort to allow people to do the work that they require to do. If they're still working on legacy systems that are no longer interoperable, and there is no way to make them interoperable otherwise, unless you go to assembly language or something. This is a very common issue. Now, the biggest bang for the least tech is to say that some of the government-centric technologies on offer may well be those that simply automated paper shuffling. And Sid points to forms. She talks about the fact that while these forms are not very expensive to create, and the licenses for form creation are very small, that you can actually get a lot of efficiency gains and productivity gains from these kinds of form creations. I remember discussing this even when I was in the workforce in the mid-90s, looking at how Adobe would help in the facilitation of forms. And this is a fascinating area where you not only can allow less errors to creep in, but also people's handwriting today is indecipherable, including my own. And so forms carry with them signatures. They also carry with them valid boxes that people can type things in, and anything else beyond that shouldn't be an acceptable attribute or piece of content. So that's chapter 4, and I'm very happy that Sid talks about the various project types, because then we're going to look at innovation for government.